The Toronto Objectivist Committee and the Freedom Party of Ontario is once again proud to present another talk here. Here's Dr. Andrew Bernstein, Ph.D. in Philosophy. He has taught in many New York State universities, including Purchase, Pace, Marymount, Long Island University, and he has lectured and talked and has done conferences across many different countries, including Canada, England, Denmark, or Norway? Netherlands, Belgium, Hong Kong, and here. Guatemala. He has lectured and written many books too. So he's very prominent. And
we have some for sale. So now I got a couple of copies of Capital Solutions.
Yay. Okay, well, before I wear you out, here's Dr. Andrew Bernstein. Let's give a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted. Can everybody hear me? You were just saying about noisemakers, and I made the reference to New Year's Eve. It just occurred to me, how cool would that be to have a lecture, on New Year's Eve somewhere, and we could party combined with an intellectual type objectivist lecture. That'd be a fun New Year's Eve. Anyhow, this is the moral and practical case for drug legalization, and just by way of introduction, I want to make a few points. First of all, since I live in New York, I was born and raised. People hear me talk. They don't figure that out. They hear me talk. They think I was from Alabama, but I'm not. I'm from New York. And I was just telling somebody I talk the way the cool kids talk. But the facts and figures and stuff in the talk are going to be based on statistics from the United States regarding drug, the DEA's or the U.S. government's war on drugs. But so the figures might probably be different in Canada, but the principles, I think, are the moral and political principles and philosophic principles are the same. A second point I want to make at the outset is a point that I learned from Ayn Rand many years ago, and if I know there's a number of people here who've read Ayn Rand. If you haven't, I strongly recommend you to read her great novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. I think those are the two most important books in anybody's education, period. But an important moral point from Ayn Rand is that the moral is the practical. To do what is morally right is what will lead to practical success if what we wish to practice is flourishing life on earth. So the moral is the practical, and the converse is also true. The immoral is the impractical. And so I think that is going to be a featured principle throughout this talk. So the moral here, the protection of individual rights, to protect an individual's right, especially consenting adults in a free society, their right to their own life, their right to their own mind, their right to govern their life by their own judgment. This is the good, and has many practical consequences, all of them benign. Conversely, to abrogate individual rights in any way, shape, or form also has many practical consequences, all of them malignant. And it's as true on the issue of drugs as it is on any other issue. Now, before I get to my theme here, I want to make an important distinction, and that is between the innocuous drugs on the one hand, marijuana preeminently, and alcohol may not be as innocuous as marijuana, but it's still a relatively, in moderation. Marijuana is certainly innocuous. Alcohol maybe less so, but still relatively less toxic drug. On the one hand, from the real toxic drugs that's popular with many people, any form of cocaine, meth, which has unfortunately become very popular in the United States, heroin, drugs like that. I want to make a distinction here because I believe in a moral crusade against drugs. The toxic, certainly the toxic drugs, just not in its legal form. So my theme is this: that drug legalization, especially, and what I mean by drug legalization is to decriminalize drugs and then to keep the government out of this. Not to have the government regulating, selling, giving away drugs, taxing drugs or whatever, but simply to decriminalize it, get the hell out of the way, and have a laissez-faire policy towards drugs. That's what I'm advocating. And I think as an end in itself, both as an end in itself, and that it then protects the right of individual citizens in a free country to choose between drug use on the one hand and clean living on the other. And also, I support this as an indispensable, what I consider an indispensable first step in what I consider a morally upright and a practically effective war on drugs, although war on drugs is really the wrong term. A moral campaign to convince people to choose clean living certainly over the toxic drugs that can kill you. So I think we should fight or wage a moral campaign against the toxic drugs, a war that is as moral as the current one is immoral, and one that is as effective as the current one is ineffective. So here's the structure of my talk. First of all, I'm going to show that the current war on drugs, both morally and practically, is a disaster. In every way, shape, and form, the current war on drugs, that is the attempt to keep people from using drugs by legally banning drugs, is a disaster. It's an abysmal failure, and that's putting it mildly. So that's the first point I want to make in the talk. The second point I want to make is to show why the current, that is legal war on drugs, is necessarily an abysmal failure, why it couldn't be otherwise, why there's no shift in administration or government policies that could make a legal war on drugs either morally or practically successful. Third, I want to outline what I consider a morally righteous and practically effective moral campaign against toxic drug use. And fourth, I want to show the philosophical principles underlying this immoral, impractical war on drugs, and the philosophic moral principles underlying a moral, practical campaign against especially toxic substances. So let's show that, the first point, let's show that the current war on drugs is an abysmal failure. Start with the moral and then move to the practical. Violation of individual rights. A legal prohibition on drugs violates the rights of individual citizens, of consenting adults, individual citizens of a free country to their own life, their own body, their own mind, denies their right to choose what substances they will ingest, what substances they will not ingest. If my life belongs to me as it does, and your life belongs to you as it does, then the government has no moral authority to dictate to any individual what substances they will ingest or will not ingest. That's up to an individual consenting adult in a free society to choose for himself or herself. Furthermore, this violation of individual rights by prohibiting people from choosing what substances they're going to use and what ones they're not going to use, leads to the incarceration of individuals whose only offense is to own drugs, is to own or sell or consume substances that the government deems illicit. Well, I forget his name in Canada. The Prince of Pot. What's his name? Mark Emery. Yeah, it's a horror story. What did he serve? 5 years in prison? 5 years in a U.S. prison for selling marijuana plants? Was it seeds? Yeah, selling marijuana seeds. Do 5 years in prison. Now that is, in the United States, it says it's the land of the free, the land of the free. So the prohibiting, the violation of individual rights on this issue leads to the incarceration of people who are innocent. In other words, they haven't committed any what could be can be considered objectively a crime. That is, they have not initiated force or fraud against an innocent victim. These are the libertarians call these victimless crimes, and then meaning they're not crimes at all. And the government should simply have a laissez-faire attitude on this. Your life belongs to you. It does not belong to the state. The government's sole purpose morally is to protect your right to your own life. And your right to your own life includes the right to risk it, even to risk it irrationally. If an adult citizen in a free society makes the choice to use cocaine or heroin or some highly toxic substance like that, it's irrational, it's self-destructive. I would use rational persuasion to try and convince the person to cease and desist. But at the end of the day, the right to your own life includes the right to risk it, even to risk it irrationally. And just as the right to free speech includes the right to remain silent, just as freedom of religion includes the right to reject religion, so the right to your own life includes the right to risk it. So, if for those of you familiar with Ayn Rand and her glorification of the human mind, that the mind is mankind's survival instrument and we need political, economic freedom so that we can govern our life by our own mind, the prohibition on drugs, the legal prohibition on drugs, is an egregious violation of an individual's right to govern his or her own life by use of their own mind. So, morally, this represents, the legal prohibition on drugs represents an egregious violation of individual rights. That's the immorality of the current war on drugs. So the moral is the practical, the immoral is the impractical. We should expect then that such immoral policies would lead to very, very harmful consequences, practical consequences in human life, and it does. So let me ask you a question. How difficult is it today, to show the abysmal failure of the war on drugs at a number of levels, how difficult would it be today to walk out of this building, out onto the campus here or at University of Toronto or in the town of Toronto, how difficult would it be to find and purchase banned substances in this burg? Is it particularly difficult? I wouldn't think so. Now, I want to base this mostly on the U.S. experience because that's what I know best. The war on drugs, the legal war on drugs, picked up in the 1970s when Nixon and then Carter were president. So we have almost 40 years, at minimum 35 years into a stringent attempt in the United States to enforce drug prohibition. Where the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, employs many tough, smart, honest cops, spends tens of billions of dollars every year. How successful has that been in keeping drugs out of banned substances out of people's hands? Well, I'll give you just. I won't overwhelm you with statistics, but from 2010. In the United States, the Office of National Drug Control Policy. I love the names these politicians and bureaucrats give to themselves. These very exalted names, right? This sounds like it comes out of Atlas Shrugged, doesn't it? The Office of National Drug Control Policy, the ONDCP, celebrated a 2009 decline in U.S. cocaine users to 1.6 million. They're celebrating a decline. This is from their own writings. They celebrated a 2009 decline in U.S. cocaine users to 1.6 million, while downplaying its own admission of, quote, overall increases in the use of other drugs, unquote. Which I'm guessing, based on other statistics I've seen in the United States, other drugs in this case, I'm guessing includes meth, which is a highly toxic, extremely dangerous drug. So how hard? How it's not difficult to find or purchase illegal drugs in Toronto. I have an anecdote here from just last week. I'm teaching summer class at Dutchess Community College in Poughkeepsie, New York, an ethics class. So we're discussing this issue. How difficult would it be to go out into Poughkeepsie, just onto the campus, and find drugs. So after class, as a night class, I was at the local diner a few blocks away from the campus, having dinner, and in walk two uniformed Poughkeepsie police officers. So this is a perfect opportunity. So, officer, I said, if I have money, I want to go out in Poughkeepsie and buy illegal drugs, how hard would it be to find them? And the two cops just laughed at me. They said, go down on Main Street. It's an open-air drug it's an open-air drug market. And I said, that includes like cocaine, heroin. They said, anything you want. Now, first of all, I didn't go check it out. I wasn't that motivated, but I believe the cops, first of all, and second of all, I don't think that Poughkeepsie in that way is atypical of American towns or cities. I suspect, not just from people I knew when I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn, but a lot of experiences around the country. I think that's fairly typical, in the United States. Here's a quote from in my book, Capital Solutions, in the section on the war on drugs. Quote from the book: several years ago, the U.S. Office of Management and Budget concluded in calm understatement, quote, DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, is unable to demonstrate its progress in reducing the availability of illegal drugs in the U.S., unquote. You know why DEA is unable to demonstrate its progress in reducing the availability of drugs in the U.S.? Because there isn't any. So, the availability of drugs, banned drugs, after 35 years. Don't forget, it's one thing to ban a substance. It's another question regarding how stringently do you attempt to enforce the ban. In the United States, the Drug Enforcement Administration and state authorities as well have been empowered to try their very best to crack down on drug use. They spend, on average, I think, at least $50 billion a year. It's probably more. I think that's a conservative estimate. At least $50 billion a year in the attempt to enforce drug prohibition, and it's a complete failure. Well, but let's go broader than that. Let's use other examples. I mean, the United States has a prior history in war on drugs, right? Alcohol is a drug. Alcohol prohibition in the 1920s, I think of it as war on drugs 1. And I think the U.S. government figured war on drugs 1 was so nice, let's do it twice. We'll have war on drugs 2. Did prohibition keep U.S. citizens from the purchase and the consumption of alcohol? No. And again, there was stringent attempt to enforce prohibition in the U.S. all through the 1920s, a decade known as the Roaring '20s. But this is debated whether alcohol consumption in the United States declined, increased, remained roughly the same in the 1920s. The reason that nobody knows for sure is that all the people drinking illegally in speakeasies or making booze at home, bathtub gin as it was known, were not about to admit to breaking the law. So we don't know for sure. What we do know for certain is this. For people who wanted alcohol and who could afford to buy it, it was readily available. That's a certainty. That alcohol prohibition and a stringent attempt to enforce that law was an abysmal failure. Let's move to a third example. What they call the oldest profession. Laws against prostitution have existed for centuries in dozens, maybe hundreds of countries on every continent. Have all those laws and attempt to enforce those laws? Have they prevented customers from, I put this delicately, customers from buying sexual services from ladies of the evening? I don't think so. Well, we'll ask Elliot Spitzer about that, right? Do you remember that story? Governor of New York who was who had made a name for himself as district attorney and cracking down on prostitution rings, and then he was busted with these expensive call girls. It was It was somewhat embarrassing. And of course, a final example here: the strict anti-handgun laws in numerous U.S. cities. I'm thinking above all Chicago, where it would be funny if it weren't so heartbreaking. Chicago may well be, parts of Chicago are like the murder capital of the Western world, especially specializing in murder with handguns. And Chicago, of course, has one of the strictest anti-handgun laws in the country, as does Detroit. It's not funny, but I mean, Detroit, D.C., the cities that have the highest homicide rate with handguns have the strictest anti-handgun laws. So the laws may well keep handguns out of the hands of honest citizens, but they certainly don't keep the guns out of the hands of criminals. So we have four examples here: drugs, booze, prostitution, guns. I think we could draw a conclusion here. The data show that it is impossible to prevent procurement of X by criminalizing purchase or ownership of X. Let me repeat that. This is an important point. It is impossible to prevent procurement of X by criminalizing purchase or ownership of X. One day the human race may figure this out. One day the human race may realize it. Making something illegal doesn't keep people who want it from getting it. I have this discussion with the anti-gun crowd in the United States all the time. What's your solution? I'll ask. Ban guns. Ban all guns. Ban them. So what do you say? And you think that if we ban guns, people who want guns won't be able to gain guns? Yeah. I mean, it is simply false. There's a ton of evidence involving any number of different examples to show that it is impossible to prevent, not unlikely or difficult, it's impossible to prevent the procurement of X by criminalizing the purchase or ownership of X. And you could plug in any value for the variable X that you like, and this remains true. Now, why? It's not enough to point out a fact. We need an explanation of it. We need a theory that explains it. Why is this so? And in this case, the relevant principle is from the field of economics. And that is, the principle involved here is where there exists demand for X, money can be made supplying it. Where there exists demand for X, money can be made supplying it. Now remember, demand is a technical term out of economics. And what economists mean by demand is not just desire for a product, it's desire backed by purchasing power. Demand means desire backed by purchasing power. There's two qualities here. One, people want X, and two, they have the means to buy it. They can afford to buy it. So what that means then, if X is legal, you see the point. Where there exists demand for X, money can be made supplying it. If X is legal, it will be supplied by honest businessmen. If X is illegal, it will be supplied by gangsters. Either way, X is supply. We have a ton of evidence supporting it. I've given some of the examples. So, notice the predictable consequences of this regarding the legal prohibition of drugs. Very predictable based on prior experience in the U.S. with the legal prohibition of alcohol. Drugs are illegal. Honest businessmen cannot traffic in them. But there's demand for drugs. Money can be made by supplying it. So gangsters then control the drug trafficking. It reminds me of one of those Star Wars movies. You guys remember Jabba the Hutt? Yeah, they called him the vile gangster, Jabba. Well, the most vile gangsters in many cases then control the drug trafficking. There's billions of dollars to be made here in domestic markets, just in North America alone. We're talking billions of dollars. Rival gangs competing for neighborhoods or towns. Of course, the violence rate with that kind of money on the line, and we're talking about violent criminals. The competition for lucrative neighborhoods or towns becomes intense, and the homicide rate predictably rises beyond significantly. The homicide rate rises drastically, it rises substantially, including that the murder, endlessly murder of innocent victims caught in the crossfire. It's not just gangsters killing each other; it's innocent victims that get caught in the crossfire. Let me read something here from my book here from Capital Solutions. That references there's an economist named Jeffrey Miron who wrote a book I don't know, about 8 years ago, called Drug War Crimes, and he's an economist, so he's looking at not at the moral issues, he's looking at the statistics. The full truth here is vastly worse. For the government's war on drugs is not merely a colossal and colossally expensive failure. It is responsible both directly and indirectly for a significant increase in violent crime and in the homicide rate. In a direct form, it makes immensely wealthy and consequently immensely powerful criminal drug cartels of varying nationalities. And this is just like during Prohibition. I mean, there was so much money to be made in alcohol bootlegging that otherwise small-time thugs like Al Capone, Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano became multi-millionaires. I mean, extremely wealthy people whose wealth enabled them to buy off mayors, police commissioners, judges, cops on the street. And corruption, of course, in American cities became rife. And that's what we see in the places in Mexico and Colombia and countries like that, where the drug cartels have billions of dollars and buys them enormous influence with the politicians. Furthermore, the bloody gang warfare that inevitably ensues results in an endless string of murders, including of innocent individuals caught in the crossfire. The hideous violence of the illegal drug trade is inescapable, because for outlaws, there is no legal method of adjudicating disputes, and given the character of the thugs involved, it is virtually inconceivable that they would avail themselves of one if there were. Jeffrey Miron points out the data showed that, quote, enforcement of drug prohibition is consistently associated with higher rates of violence, unquote. Indeed, he says, quote, the estimated impact of enforcement on homicide is not only positive but large. It suggests that eliminating drug prohibition would reduce homicide in the United States by a staggering 25 to 75%, unquote. I don't doubt those statistics. I think what we could say for sure is that an enormous number of murders committed in the United States and in other countries surrounded drug trafficking, swirl around the illegal drug trade. Now, that's not bad enough. There's other harmful consequences of the legal prohibition of drugs, and that is to the extent that law enforcement incarcerates people for owning or selling drugs. To that extent, it is not law enforcement and the criminal justice system is not protecting innocent people from murderers, jihadists, and other violent criminals. How much resources went into investigating, apprehending, prosecuting, and then incarcerating Mark Emery? All of this takes manpower. It takes investigative hours. It ties up the court system. The DA is prosecuting Mark Emery. You're going after a guy. He's a major case, but there are obviously other people like that. In other words, you're putting people in prison, going through the whole process of the criminal justice system, using the law enforcement people, the man hours, the money, the court system, the prisons, etc., devoted to going after people whose sole offense is to buy or sell or possess marijuana or some other drug. To the extent, any country's state, municipality, whatever, resources are finite. They have a limited amount of manpower. They have a limited amount of money. They have a limited amount of time, and to the extent that it's devoted to putting people in prison, investigating, prosecuting, incarcerating people whose sole offense is they own drugs or sell drugs. To that extent, that manpower and that time is not being used to go after real violent people. So there's another failure of the legalized war on drugs. We haven't even mentioned, or barely mentioned, the expense. Was it $50 billion a year in the United States? I mean, just think what that money could be done with. You do away with the failed legal war on drugs. End the taxes that support it. $50 billion in the hands of American people. They'll do what they want with it, but some of that money will be used productively. Some of that money can be used to invest in Apple, to fund research and development, and create more awesome stuff, as Steve Jobs called it. Some of that money might be used to be invested in biotech companies, which God knows, what kind of life-saving advances they'll make in the 21st century. That $50 billion a year, that's a lot of money. Who was the American politician? I can't remember who it was offhand. He said, there's $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and pretty soon we're talking about real money. This is the way politicians. Well, we're talking about real money here that could be used productively, not squandered away in a completely futile legalized war on drugs. So you see the principle here. The moral is the practical. The immoral is the impractical. So you violate the rights of individuals to choose for themselves what substances they will use, consenting adults. You violate the rights of consenting adults in a free society, and look at the necessary results. A significantly higher homicide rate, including of innocent people, law enforcement being used to incarcerate people for no other so-called crime than owning drugs, and thereby diverted from going after violent criminals and jihadists. Tens of billions of dollars wasted annually, money that could be spent on productive activities, all in an attempt to prevent people from using drugs, an attempt that is an abysmal and predictable failure. What a freaking waste. This is a lose across the board. This is simply, morally and practically, this is an abysmal failure. This is a disaster. The immoral war on drugs is, in practical terms, an abysmal failure. So, what's the proper steps to take here? What should be done? So I want to outline a moral and practical campaign against toxic drug use. And again, we need to make a distinction between of the illegal drugs. Alcohol is generally legal, in certainly in the Western countries. Of the banned drugs, marijuana is everything I know about marijuana is that it's the most innocuous of drugs, and that in moderation people can certainly incorporate marijuana into a creative and fulfilled life in moderation, like alcohol. Even more so. I think alcohol is probably more toxic than marijuana. I'm not a user, but from what I've read. But these lethal drugs, these toxic drugs. You guys remember? Does the name Len Bias resonate with anybody? Any NBA fans? You guys remember Len Bias? It's a really sad story. He was a great basketball player, University of Maryland. He was the best player in college basketball. He was drafted by the Boston Celtics, #1 pick in the draft. He was a good kid. He was a clean liver. He was a good kid. And to celebrate that, his friends convinced him to use cocaine. I think it was the only time he ever used it. And then he had a seizure and stopped his heart, and he died. I don't know, like 21, 22. Is just a tragedy. So these kinds of drugs, cocaine in any form, heroin, meth, these kind of drugs are toxic. They're enormously dangerous. And so anybody who cares, any rational human being who cares about his brothers and sisters, doesn't want to see people kill themselves on these kind of drugs. Len Bias' case is a tragedy. So what would be a morally upright and practically effective way to save people's lives from these kinds of toxic substances? We can't ban the use. That's immoral. That's violates people's rights. So what can we do? Here are the steps. First of all, like I said before, I think we need to decriminalize all drugs, then leave it alone. Have a laissez-faire attitude. The government should remain out of this. Government on issues like these is at best useless. Right? There's nothing the government could do. We have all the evidence given it, not just about drugs, but about all these other examples. The government intervention here, government interference on these issues is at best futile. At worst, it's ironic. It's the government itself in this legal war on drugs, the government itself, that's the criminal. You know, Mark Emery is not a criminal by any objective measure. He's not initiating force or fraud against anybody. The government's initiating force. You know, they're putting people in prison for no other offense than owning or using or selling drugs. So the government at best is useless on this issue. At worst, it's criminal. So what can we do? If we decriminalize all drugs and have a laissez-faire attitude towards them, many consequences follow, all of them benign. First of all, it removes drug trafficking from the hands of the vile gangsters and places it in the hands of honest businessmen. So what happened in the U.S. when the prohibition on alcohol was lifted in 1933? As before prohibition was instituted in 1919, alcohol was honest businessmen could then traffic in alcohol. Liquor stores opened where where adults could buy alcohol in the liquor store. It took alcohol bootlegging and alcohol trafficking out of the hands of these vile gangsters. And the point, of course, is if you put Al Capone in prison, or you execute some of these guys because they're murderers. Right now, if the government of any country, Colombia, Mexico, the United States, Canada, whatever, if they bust a drug cartel and put these guys in prison or execute them for murder, what happens? Is that the end of the drug trafficking? No. There's so much money involved here. There's so much money that could be gained by drug trafficking. If you bust one cartel, it's like Hydra, I mean Hydra in the Greek mythology, not in the Marvel, not in the Avengers, But, the Hydra was a monster that if you chopped off its head, 10 more grew to take its place. It's almost like that with the drug cartels. The economic incentive is so high. The money that can be gained is so great that you chop down one of these cartels and 10 more spring up to take their place. But if you legalize the drugs, then of course honest businessmen could sell them. You disenfranchise these vile gangsters. Eventually you put them away for whatever crimes they've committed, real crimes like murder, and without the economic incentive, without the billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars to be gained in drug trafficking, there's no more Hydra. There's no more more gangs to spring up. The economic incentive has been removed. And then businessmen could sell drugs in non-pharmaceutical drug stores, the way liquor in the United States is sold in liquor stores. Like I said, the criminal gangs are disenfranchised. You can incarcerate them. They don't replicate because the economic incentive has been removed. I could sound like Jesse Jackson here. Incarcerate, don't replicate. But that's true. The homicide rate declines dramatically. The homicide rate declines dramatically, just like it did after the end of alcohol. When alcohol prohibition was ended in 1933, very predictably, the homicide rate went up after alcohol prohibition began, and enforcement of alcohol prohibition began in 1919, and it came back down after 1933, after the end of alcohol prohibition, obviously after the end of enforcing it. So the homicide rate declines most benignly. The most benign point there is the murder of innocent people who are caught in the crossfire between these gangs, between these murderers. We can then devote law enforcement assets no longer need to be devoted to put people in prison simply for owning drugs or using drugs or selling drugs, and that they could be all those law enforcement resources can be used to go after real criminals and jihadists who want to blow up our cities. The money spent on this futile legal war on drugs can be invested in productive activities. No drug users, no people in jail, no Mark Emerys in prison simply for being drug users or sellers. And above all, I think it clears the wreckage of this abysmal failure it enables us to take rational, morally upright, and practically effective steps to try and save lives from toxic drugs. And what are the steps? If we're going to have a morally upright and practically effective, I don't want to call it a war because it's not literally a war, but a moral campaign to save people's lives from save people or protect people from killing themselves on truly toxic substances. What are the steps, of that? And I think the first step we could all take, in an effective campaign, in a morally upright and practically effective campaign against drugs, is don't use drugs. Like I say to the politicians, if they could listen, do you really want to help people or prevent people from killing themselves on toxic drugs? The first thing you could do is don't use drugs. Live a clean life. Now, in other words, walk the walk, right? Once we walk the walk, of course, now we can talk the talk. Now we can talk the talk. But I think walking the walk here is not just being a clean liver and not risking your life on any form of cocaine or heroin or even drinking in excess, which is relatively dangerous, and certainly not drinking and driving. But not only walking the walk means not only living a clean life, but it means living a life of value achievement, of recognizing we live in Western countries are still semi-free. We're slowly moving towards dictatorship, and the war on drugs, of course, the legalized war on drugs is one aspect of that, the violation of individual rights. But the Western countries are still relatively free. And what that means is look at the values that we can achieve, that rational human beings could achieve in a semi-free country. We could pursue education in some field that we love, like engineering, for example, right? In my case, philosophy and literature, pursue an education in a field we love, have a productive career in a field that we find fascinating, have close friendships, with people that you can trust with your life. That was always my gold standard, do I want this person in my life as a friend? And that is morally, question was, can I trust this person with my life? And if the answer to that was yes, then of course, that I want this person in my life. Now that I have a child, my ex-wife and I adopted a little girl from China, who's now 12 years old. Now my question on this issue has become even more intense, and that is, can I trust this person with my daughter's life? And the answer to that is yes. That I want this person in my life. And I want to be friends, with that kind of a person. And how do you attract those kind of persons into your life? Or you be that kind of person. That's how you do it. The people know that they could trust you with their life, and they could trust you with their child's life. And having relationships like that, this is an enormous value in the life of any rational human being. Romantic love. Have a romantic relationship, even more fulfilling than a friendship. Again, with a man or woman that has that kind of character, that you could trust with your life, that you can trust with your child's life. Have family, so you have education, possibility of education, career, friendship, romantic love, children, and all the travel, the arts, entertainment, sports, physical fitness, all of these great values, that are possible to us. This is the kind of life that we can lead, that we can live. Thereby walking the walk fully in this way, living a life of rational self-fulfillment, we can reach out to our brothers and sisters, that we can teach this. What Ayn Rand's point here is values are the meaning of life. Right? Values are not only what make life possible, values are what get not only our survival, but flourishing, all-around fulfillment and joyous living. Values are the meaning of life. And so we could, having walking the walk, we could teach this to our children, our students, our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, anybody who will listen to us. And that is, do you want to risk? You could have all of these things in your life. Do you really want to risk all of this for a few moments of a drug-induced high? A few moments of whatever pleasure there is in smoking crack, if there's any pleasure in that. Do you really want to risk the richness of what life in a semi-free society holds out to you for a few moments of a drug-induced high? I mean, we could point out to people, don't you see how irrational that is? You can have all this. So let me read again from Capitalist Solutions on this issue in the section on drugs. So, one thing a clean living man or woman can do to help his brothers and sisters is to achieve a life of shining value fulfillment. He or she can realize himself in education, career, romance, family, friends, physical fitness, travel, etc. He or she can think we can fill our lives with reality-adhering, life-promoting values, thereby experiencing profound happiness. We could set an example accessible to all with eyes to see of what a healthy, happy, drug-free life looks like. To consistently talk the talk, one must antecedently walk the walk. Based on such a life, the clean liver is free to use rational persuasion to reach any individual within his purview with a single unrelenting message. Values are the meaning of life. Rational values produce flourishing life. Toxic drugs produce premature death. The clean liver thereby appeals to the best within men, their reasoning mind. He respects their right of choice. Rather than coerce them, he reasons with them. In deeds, he is a paragon of value achievement. In words, a lofty spokesman for it. An effectual war on drugs is necessarily not a legal struggle, but an intellectual, educational, moral one. We must teach our children, our students, our friends, our neighbors, the code of what Ayn Rand terms rational egoism, that an individual's life belongs to him or her, that attainment of personal happiness is sacred, that happiness is gained by unswerving pursuit of life-enhancing values, and that an individual must never sacrifice, betray, or surrender those values. Such a code urges value achievement and joy. It is inspiring. It galvanizes human beings, individuals, and uplifts them. Why should an individual risk death for a few moments of pleasure from toxic drugs when a rich life of education, career, love, children, friends, etc., is his or hers to be gained? So, such a philosophical, moral, educational program is a moral way to, I don't want to say war on drugs, that's not the right metaphor. Wars are violent and bloody, right? This is moral persuasion. This is a morally upright way to campaign against drug use, and because it's moral, it is vastly more practical. It treats adults like adults instead of the state treating us like children. It respects a human being's right to govern his or her own life by his or her own mind. It appeals to the best within human beings, their reasoning mind, their better judgment, their love of life, their desire to achieve values, their intent to gain fulfillment, their quest to live happily. It does not force individuals, incarcerate them, or punish them for drug use. Rather, it rewards them for rational, life-promoting, happiness-inducing choices. Reality will punish the toxic drug user. Right? I mean, we've seen people strung out. I won't ask by a show of hands, how many people in this room have known friends who died, from drug use. I certainly have. Growing up in Brooklyn, trying to, when did drugs, non-alcohol drugs, first become widespread in the United States? I would say in the mid-1960s, roughly. That's 50 years ago. So we have 50 years. I don't know what the corresponding figures or dates are in Canada, but in the United States, I would say we've had roughly 50 years of widespread drug use. And some of them very toxic drugs, and I know friends. I've had friends who died, from cocaine overdoses, and I think there's probably other people in this room, who've seen them. So, as Ayn Rand points out, reality is inescapable. We can choose to evade, look away, look aside from the knowledge that toxic drugs, can be lethal. But we can make that choice to use toxic drugs, but we cannot escape the consequences. And so reality will punish people for the use of toxic drugs. But the code here that I endorse encourages them to reward themselves with the benefit of clean living and value achievement. Now, notice something. We care about our brothers and sisters. We don't want to see them die from crack or coke or heroin. But remember something. People have free will. They're going to make their choices. There's no campaign against drugs that can save them all. There's no campaign that can save them all. But the question here, what campaign will save by far the most innocent lives? And I don't think there's any contest. The moral, educational, philosophic campaign against drugs will reach vastly more people than the abysmally failed legalized prohibition of drugs. It'll save vastly more lives. Now, notice, put in economic terms. A few last points. Let me wrap this up. We can go to Q&A. Notice in economic terms, what I'm recommending here is a campaign against the demand for drugs rather than a campaign against the supply of drugs. Right? The legalized war on drugs was against supply. We're trying to prevent drug dealers from selling drugs. That's hopeless for the reasons I gave. As long as the demand is high, the supply is going to be there. A successful campaign, both morally and practically, one that respects individual rights of choice and that can be practically successful, devotes itself focuses on the demand for drugs, recognizes that this is a question of people's values. If they value drugs, then they're going to be willing to spend their money on drugs. And so we need to teach people we care about, or anybody who will listen to us, that toxic drugs are not of value. And here's where Ayn Rand's philosophy is so helpful: that values are that which promote life, not that which promote death. That's why Hitler's not a hero. Right? That's why he's a major villain. He's a mass murderer. Values are that which promote life, not that which promote death. And so we could reach people with that message and all the life promoting values and thereby the happy, the values that lead to flourishing life, on earth and the emotional concomitant of happiness. These are the values that are proper for human beings, not toxic drugs. So the campaign here becomes one of rational persuasion regarding values. That value should be that which promotes life, not that which promotes death. Now, here's my conclusion. For those of you who know the history of Western philosophy, what we've been waging for many years is a campaign against drugs that basically under the influence of the Greek philosopher Plato. And Plato, if you've read the Republic, and Plato's widely read, obviously, in every university philosophy class, as he should be. He's an enormously important philosopher. But his magnum opus, of course, the Republic. It's funny it has that title, the Republic, when what Plato advocates is a totalitarian state. But part of the totalitarianism in Plato is what's become known as paternalism. The government is like a loving father. And since most children, I think, are raised more by their moms than by their dads, maybe this should be called maternalism. Either way, the state is construed as being parental, that the government's going to take care of us. And you see Plato's primaries here. Most human beings are irrational. There's only a few, like Socrates, who are dedicated to rational thinking and wisdom. And those are the few that should govern. We should have a philosopher king or queen. Because most of us are irrational. We're irresponsible. We're self-destructive. We need the wise hand of the government to rule our lives benignly. That's almost comical today, the wise hand of the government. This is paternalism. Now, Plato, of course, is not thinking of Stalin or Hitler or Mao as the rules. He's thinking of Socrates. That Socrates is a philosopher. And philosophy, of course, is Greek for love of wisdom. So you want the lovers of wisdom, the true philosophers, to govern, not the lovers of power, not the lovers of wealth, not the lovers of bodily pleasure, but the lovers of wisdom. And it's in my self-interest as an irrational, worker ant, grunt, to have my life governed by the wise king, Socrates, because he'll govern my life much more benignly than I can govern it myself. And that's basically what the war on drugs and the previous war on alcohol in the U.S. were all about. Not entirely, but in large part. The government needs to protect us from ourselves. Right? This is paternalism. As if you and I are children, the government is a parent, and parents have to protect young children from whatever thing they're going to, self-destructive thing they're going to do. So the government, the wise hand of the government, needs to protect me from my own irrational urges. That's a Platonic, the Platonic war on drugs that we've seen. So ban it, ban this stuff. You can't let people use it. The government knows best. Now that's an abysmal failure for many reasons, as we've seen. I think the campaign, the moral campaign against toxic drug use that I briefly outlined here is an Aristotelian campaign against drug use for several reasons. Aristotle, of course, Plato's most brilliant student. There's certainly in Aristotle's philosophy, there's many legacies of Platonism there, but he's also a very different kind of thinker from Plato in essentials. Aristotle, of course, is the one who defines human beings as the rational animal. And of course, you can see here then that the way to encourage people to live a life of legitimate value achievement is to reach out to appeal to the best within them, to appeal to their reasoning mind. Ayn Rand, of course, took the Aristotelian insight further. Aristotle pointed out man is the rational animal. That's what distinguishes us from the lions and tigers and bears, oh my. But Ayn Rand, of course, took that to the next level, that reasoning is not just our mankind's fundamental differentiating characteristic, but also it's our survival instrument. And so, and this means socially as well as dealing with nature. We need to learn how to grow food and build cities and cure diseases, all of which requires the reasoning mind. But socially, also, we need to reason with people. And so rational persuasion, appealing to the best within people, appealing to their reasoning mind, to their better judgment, not forcing them or punishing them for choices they make, but appealing to their rational mind. Aristotle had more confidence in mankind's rationality than Plato did. Plato thought there's only a few, like Socrates, and the rest of us are driven by our impulses and urges. Aristotle had a wider view of mankind's rationality and the ability to reason with human beings. And the second Aristotelian element, I think, in the campaign against toxic drug use that I've outlined here is that Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics talks about that the virtuous life lies in what he calls the quest for eudaimonia. Now, eudaimonia has for a long time has been translated into English as happiness. But there's been a lot of Aristotle scholarship in recent decades, and the Aristotle scholars now assure us that what Aristotle means by eudaimonia is not happiness. That's just part of it. But what he means by this is flourishing life. don't forget, Aristotle was one of the great biologists of history. Along with Darwin, he's considered the two greatest biologists of history. In fact, a book came out last fall, written by an English biology professor, called The Lagoon: How Aristotle Invented Modern Science, which may be something of an overstatement, but still, the Aristotelian method, especially in the field of biology, absolutely facilitated the development of science. He's one of the great biologists of history. So flourishing life. The imagery I have in my mind is a plant, just growing its leaves up to the sun in this robust, green, living being, and just flourishing. And so, this life of flourishing life in accordance with human nature, with with the nature of a rational being. So that's what we're appealing to here. That somebody to encourage people to achieve flourishing life all around human development, all around rational development, in all the values that we were discussing: education, career, love, friendship, children, etc., etc. This is a very Aristotelian war on drugs, or campaign against toxic drug use, appealing to the best within them, their rational mind, and their quest for eudaimonia, their quest for this all-around flourishing life. And I think if we do this, I think respect people's right to choose what they want to do with their own lives, respect them enough to reason with them, respect them enough to respect their lives, respect them enough to point out to them all the rich life of value achievement that is possible to them, that we're going to save a lot more lives than the abysmally failed legal prohibition on drugs. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So now we're going to roll into the Q&A. I think we're a small enough group that we can make it pretty lax. If we can maybe, we're aiming for questions here, but sometimes questions need to be prefaced. So try to limit to 1 minute, and let's challenge Dr. Bernstein as much as we can. Maybe I'll start with, and take some privilege here. You mentioned rights, but in Canada we have a right to health care and various other services. So what exactly do you mean by rights? It's kind of vague to me.
Well, I certainly believe in the right to free food and free health care. No, I'm teasing. Rights involve the freedom to take action. The rights involve the freedom to take action to achieve the values that you want. There's not a guarantee of success. So there's no right to health care. There's a right to take all the actions that you can to gain the health care that you need. The right to use rational persuasion to try and convince other people to help you, voluntarily help you gain that value. But rights are basically freedom of action. They involve the freedom to take the steps necessary to gain the values your life requires, and of course protect you. The moral principles that protect you from the initiation of force from others, protect you from other people restraining you from taking the actions that your life requires. A right is basically the freedom to take action to achieve the values life requires. It's not a guaranteed access to food or housing or health care, because if I had guaranteed access to food, for example, the question would be, at whose expense? And if other people are the only answer to that would be from others who are more successful than I am. Well, if others necessarily have to provide me with food, then there's a word for people who have to work, for somebody else, who have to. It's their moral obligation. They're called slaves, and that it violates their rights to take freedom of action to promote their own life. So there's no right to violate others' rights. There's no conflict between and amongst rights, because rights involve the freedom to take action, to gain the values we need without initiating force or fraud against anybody else. So that's what rights are. So we have a right to pursue health care, and a right to ask other people to help us pursue health care, a right to try to persuade them to help us pursue it, the right for charity organizations to set up to help me if I'm too poor to gain health care. But I don't have a right to health care. What would that mean? That means that the MD has to take care of me even if I can't pay him? Does that mean other people have to be ripped off by the government in taxes to pay the MD? If that's the case, if I have a guaranteed access to health care, then somebody's being robbed. And of course, that's a contradiction. There's no right to violate somebody else's rights. Sure.
Thank you, and I should mention that...
That's why they pay me the big bucks. Actually, I won't tell you how much they pay me. It's embarrassing.
Just raise your hand and I'll come around with the mic if you have a question.
Conrad has the mic. He's the man with the power.
Thank you very much for a very good presentation. I totally agree with the concept of kind of decriminalization of drugs. However, I'm not so certain about the outcome of this without some sort of, let's put it, regulations by society rather than government. I know the word government does not fly in this kind of setting. So let's talk about society's ability. So if we look back at things like a few decades back, smoking was allowed without any restriction. Now, even though people can smoke, there are lots of regulations that kind of curtail smoking. People used to freely, more or less, drink and drive, and the kind of consequences have become much more serious, and as a result, the impact of drunken driving has diminished, and so on and so forth. One can, for instance, prescription drugs. Are we going to say that prescription drugs are going to be available to everyone? We ban the concept of prescription because otherwise you have to stop people who would want to sell prescription drugs, and there is a market, just as there is a market for entertainment drugs, there is a market for prescription drugs. So I think I'm limiting myself to the 1 minute. And
So was there a question?
So the question is, what kind of regulation? Are you simply saying that if we just leave it, things would work themselves out? Or are you okay, for instance, with the 3 examples that I gave here as kind of framework that would still be permissible within what you would call laissez-faire, or would that not be?
First of all, did everybody hear the question? No. Oh, okay. The question is, do I believe in not only in decriminalizing drugs, but then having a laissez-faire attitude towards them, government not involved in this, or do I think that there should be some regulation on this? And the question is cited, for instance, cigarette smoking, and I think that's cigarette smoking is the closest analogy here, and my answer to that is I certainly do not agree that the government has the moral authority to ban cigarette smoking on private property. You know, for instance, in many countries, including the U.S. and I think in Canada, they'll ban the cigarette smoking is banned in many restaurants, right? And I think that's an egregious violation of the property rights of the restaurateur. It's the restaurateur's property, just like your home is your property, and in your home you have the right to say if cigarette smoking is allowed or it is not. So in a restaurant, the owner, not the government, has that moral authority. And I think what happens on a free market is since there are many smokers and there are many non-smokers, money can be made so that some restaurants will permit smoking and some restaurants will ban it. And some restaurants restaurants will have a smoking section, a non-smoking section, and then the customers choose, where they want to eat. I think that's a proper policy, and I think, in other words, it's a laissez-faire policy on the part of the government, respecting the rights of property owners to decide whether smoking is permitted on their property or not. And I think that's the same policy with drugs. I think the government needs to stay the hell out of this. The government has no role in this, and I think the proper moral campaign against drugs is as I outlined, by private individuals, private organizations, private enterprise, stressing to people the private schools, parents to their children, private schools, since I certainly want to abolish the government school system and privatize, establish a free market of education, and private schools teaching their children, teaching their students, about the virtues of clean living, the possibility of value achievement, the possibility of flourishing life, and the irrationality of risking it for a few moments of a high, on a toxic drug. That, I think, is the way to conduct a moral campaign against drugs. And regarding regulation, it is society in a way, but it's society's composed of individuals. It's rational individuals using rational persuasion, appealing to their brothers and sisters' rational understanding to promote a value-laden life, not a life of self-destruction. That I think is the way to regulate drug use.
Thank you. A lyric from a song sung in the movie Woodstock came to mind while I was listening to your lecture. I don't have it quite clear in my mind, but it was sung by John B. Sebastian of the Love and Spoonful. Something about his son being 5 and his girlfriend's only 3, and she's taking LSD, and now she wants to give a hit to me.
Jeez.
I was wondering if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I find that horrifying. Did you hear the question? The question was, he's quoting a song from Loving Spoonful. Was that at Woodstock, you said? Yeah, my what was it? Okay, but it was Younger Generation, and it's about three-year-olds using LSD or something, and well, this is a good reason why we need to persuade parents, that to not use such dangerous drugs as LSD, and to certainly not let their 3-year-old or 5-year-old children, use such drugs. And when the children, here's where we need to be an example. I mean, I knew plenty of hippies. I'm old enough to remember. I mean, I wasn't in San Francisco during the Summer of Love in 1967 in Haight-Ashbury. I was on the other side of the country. But New York wasn't appreciably different from San Francisco. And I remember a lot of the hippies, and I know plenty of people today who are who are 65 years old now, unreconstituted hippies, and weren't very good parents in many cases, and they had their 3- and 5-year-old kids, romping around the room while they were using drugs and listening to the Grateful Dead, and not that I have anything against the Dead, but kids grew up with mom and dad using all kinds of different drugs in plain sight. Not a very good role model for parents. So I think certainly parents need to, one, live a clean life. 2, don't permit their children to use LSD, which is a very dangerous drug. And 3, teach them as they grow older the reasons why they shouldn't use LSD. So you asked me what my reaction was to that song. I'm horrified by it. That's my reaction to it.
Okay, here's a question about if a parent. I had this argument about drug legalization many years ago with a friend of mine, Alfred, and he had said to me, if your child is born, like if fetal alcohol syndrome, for example, a child is born with fetal alcohol syndrome, which is terrible. It's really destroying a child before they're born, and once they're born, the parent, willingly does a drug, such as a toxic drug that harms that child. where do you think the parents' rights in that sense are, in the sense that once that child's born and they know they're going to have that child, it's a mother that's pregnant and she's doing cocaine or heroin or whatever, or meth, and that child is now born, does that child have a right to, in a sense, some type of, could she sue that mother for harming that child? I mean, where do you stand on that one? I mean,
that's a really good question, and that's a very subtle question. Again, I'll repeat the question. The question is, what about a pregnant woman who intends to have a child and who's a drug user or an alcoholic, and the medical biological facts are clear that if this continues, the child will be, is going to be severely harmed, right? There's severe bodily harm here. I don't think, I don't think if that's the context, the mother's going to have the child. I don't think it's her right to be a drug user. It's not her right to medically harm her child. It's not her right to turn her child into an alcoholic or drug addict or whatever the. In other words, if the state can establish in court medical testimony, the best medical testimony we have in a court of law, that this child is going to be severely harmed, bodily harmed, by such a policy, then I think the government needs to step in and protect the right of the child, even though that child's not born yet. If that child's going to be born, either mom's got to abort, or if she intends to have the child, she needs to protect her child. And I think the government needs has a legitimate role in protecting children from their parents. If parents are violent, they violently abuse the child, I think the government needs to step in, and I don't think it changes simply because the child's unborn. That child's going to be born as a drug addict, or that child's going to be born with severe medical problems. If that's biologically demonstrable in court, then I think the government has the duty, the moral authority to prevent that from happening. Have the baby and then be a drug addict. You don't have I don't think you have the right to physically harm your child.
Thanks, Andy, for the talk. That was great.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I have a challenge for your thesis. You're saying one of the ways of engaging in a persuasion in this campaign against toxic drugs. How do you explain the people, or what you were saying? It sounds like is that if we live a life of virtue and of value pursuit, that we then I guess inoculate ourselves maybe against the temptation of drugs, and maybe then we act as a model for other people. But how do you explain people like like celebrities or who seem to be living a life that is, at the peak of value pursuit, but they still fall to drugs that destroy their lives and their careers. And you see that. I see this in healthcare with numerous doctors that I've been acquainted with over the years. Have told me about they start dipping into the injectable narcotics. You get musicians and celebrities. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts and comments on that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. The question is how come the music industry people are the paradigm examples, right? But it's much more extensive than the music industry. Of people who are very talented, very creative, living creatively. Creating values, music is a main example. Very often doing it successfully. So you're living the dream. Keith Richards. I'm a classic rocker. So Keith Moon, Keith Richards, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin. Was age 27 was the magic number, right? These people killed themselves at age. Many of them killed themselves. Keith Richards still alive, although at age 27 he looked like he was 80. But he's a medical marvel. But the toxic drug use and the self-destructiveness of people who are, one, very creative, presumably doing what they loved, like Howard Roark and the Fountainhead, they're doing what they loved, but two, they're much more commercially successful than Howard Roark was. So why do they feel the need to kill themselves? I've been thinking about that since I was a teenager. That is very puzzling, and it's not just in the field of music. That's true of people in the entertainment industry and in many industries. I'm sure there's any. What do they say in medicine? Physician, heal thyself. You see. Yeah, MDs who are drug users and stuff. And I think you can't get away from the fact, several facts. First of all, people have free will. They make their choices, and their choices are not always consistent. So that the point number two related to this is people are often mixed. They're often mixtures of, just like we have a mixed economy in the Western world now, part socialism, part capitalism, part government controls, part freedom. So people are often of mixed spirituality, or mixed moral character. Part of their thinking, part of their premises are very rational, very life-promoting, filled with joy. Part of their premises are irrational, self-destructive, cause misery and even early death. People are often mixed, and psychologically they're often in conflict. And I think this is why psychotherapy. It's great that psychotherapy exists in the modern world. Prior to Freud, however crazy Freud himself was, he revolutionized the field of clinical psychology. Now there's the possibility of psychotherapy for somebody who's internally conflicted. That's why I was so surprised when somebody like Robin Williams committed suicide, who's very talented, very successful, very wealthy. Whatever demons afflicted him, he could have afforded, for all I know, did, the best clinical psychologist in the world. So people are often mixed. They're premises, a mixture of premises that are rational and irrational, values that are life-promoting, or anti-values that are life-destroying, and they're often in internal conflict. And sometimes the demons, they talk about somebody as demons. Sometimes the demons win the battle over the rational. Over the rational convictions. I'll tell you something. A friend of mine who's a musician told me about Bruce Springsteen a few years ago. He said Bruce Springsteen's been continuously in psychotherapy with the same psychologist for 30 years. And my first reaction to that was negative. I said, whoa, I would never do that. I would want to get healthy and get the hell out. But then it occurred to me, no, there's something heroic about that, is that if you think you have problems, or there's something holding you back, or there's some inner constraint, or there's some demons, to use the metaphor, there's something heroic about dig into that with a trained clinician who knows you well, who's treated you for 30 years, and just keep getting healthier, and certainly he has the means. Bruce Springsteen can afford, can afford. So I admire that. I respect it. Now, if somebody tells me, I hear the news tomorrow, Bruce Springsteen committed suicide, I'm going to be, very disappointed after more than 30 years of psychotherapy. But people are often in internal conflict, I think, I'm not a psychologist. I think a rational psychologist would be necessary to take the answer to that question deeper. But I think we could say people are often in internal conflict. The fact that people are very creative and even very, very successful at doing what they love doesn't mean they're not afflicted with some kind of internal problems that they may or may not address. Here's what I love about it, and I'll confess here. I haven't always been the paragon of mental health you see before you today. I spent many years in psychotherapy myself, paid a lot of money that on a philosophy professor's salary because I came out of a family that put the D in dysfunctional, and wanted, and I thought mental health was an enormous value. So I've pursued it. But here's what I love of many things about Ayn Rand and Objectivism. What I think of as the John Galt, mentality, and that is face reality. whether it's painful, scary, ugly, whatever it is, face reality. And if I have some problems, then by God, I need to face them, you know, and well, by rational analysis, I need to face them and get better. For my own self, for my own life, for my own happiness, for my own fulfillment, and of course for the people I love and for the people who love me. And so there are, you know, what's an interesting point? There are people who, like war heroes, and I've known some in my life, because in the early 60s when I was a kid, you know, a lot of World War II vets were still alive. And not only alive, they were young. You know, if they were 25 in, let's say, 1943, then in 1961, they're 43 years old. You know, they were relatively young. I knew a lot of vets who, oh man, what they went through with some of these battles in the Pacific, and some of these Marines on Guadalcanal, these bloodbath battles, you know, in World War II, and they were heavily decorated. You know, they they faced death, Japanese machine gun fire, or whatever. Now that clearly can mess you up. You know, what they've been through, the blood and guts and horror of it. But a lot of these guys wouldn't go into therapy. And looking back on it, they had the courage to face machine gun fire, but not the courage to face whatever internal demons, you know. And I realized from that much later, not when I was a kid, but much later, I realized that there are different kinds of courage. You know, there are different kinds of courage. I would never have had the physical courage to charge into machine gun fire. I would, you know, and I got to tell you, one guy told me, he said to me when I was, I'll never forget this, I was 10 and he was 40-something. You know, and a lot of times combat vets only talk about this kind of stuff with other combat vets because it's so hellish. Those of us who haven't been in it can't comprehend it. I got to use a vulgarity here. Is that okay? I got to quote this guy. He's a war hero on Guadalcanal. He said he was, I can't remember if it was Tarawa or Saipan, one of these bloodbath islands in the Pacific where the Marine first wave ashore took 80% casualties. He said to me, the Japanese machine gun fire was so intense, he said to me, I literally shit my pants. But he still got up and he charged into the machine gun fire. Now, I would have just shit my pants and stayed there in the landing craft. I wouldn't have had the courage to do that. But he died young from the problems he had, not physical problems, the psychological problems that tormented him. It's really sad. But he didn't. Psychotherapy in the 1960s was, you know, becoming fairly widespread in the United States. He didn't do it. I have that kind of courage. I could face the demons of, you know, what my mom was like, what my dad was like, what's the truth about my family. You know, I could face that. Not machine gun fire, though. But there's different kinds of courage. And the people you're talking about, I think, are enormously creative and often very successful, but there's something inside them that needs to be addressed that they very often don't address, and they become drinkers or drug addicts or some combination of the two to anesthetize themselves from the pain that they need to face, and it's very sad. It's very sad. But people make their choices. There's, you know, all we can do is try to use rational persuasion. Right? See, like the Platonic answer would be, force them into therapy. Drag him, I would drag you in to see the shrink. You know, and of course, that'll work, you know.
Robert De Niro. You remind me of a little bit of Robert De Niro.
Yeah, my ex-wife used to say I looked like De Niro, and I used to tell her I like to have De Niro's cash flow, you know, but...
So my question is, when we look at the prohibition on booze for 14 years, it sounds like,
yeah.
And we compare that to what's happening now in 50 years, with the war on drugs, and I think maybe that is a fair analogy. But I'm wondering what the mechanism was after 14 years, and is it really fair to say it went into a laissez-faire type market situation with booze? Because I don't feel entirely that it has. I guess with the control mechanisms today, especially in Canada, when it relates to booze and alcohol. And so that's one issue, but do you see how, after 50 years so far, what could be a mechanism that eventually would come to, is it laissez-faire, or again, is it just really more control of the government and the drugs that might be more readily available, meaning not the gangsters and stuff, as you were saying. And where are we heading with that?
Well, where are we headed? Part of the question is where are we heading? Was the rest of the question, what's the role of government? I'm not sure what the rest of the question was.
Is it fair that we went into laissez-faire after 14 years at the end of the Prohibition?
Is it fair that we went? Is it accurate that we went into laissez-faire in the United States? You're talking about after alcohol prohibition was lifted. I don't know. I mean, I understand your point. I don't know if it's laissez-faire. There is a government, U.S. government agency, the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms. I love the Texas redneck mentality on this, that alcohol, tobacco, firearms ought to be a convenience store, not a government agency, but which I full-mindedly and wholeheartedly agree with. There is some. I think I'm not a drinker, so I'm really a boring. I'm a bookworm. I'm not a drug user at all. Although I have to admit that in college I was known to imbibe the devil's weed, at times, and unlike certain people who shall remain nameless, I even inhaled, and but it's been a long time. But I think I'm not sure there's still some governmental regulation in the U.S. on alcohol, but it's largely a free market. I mean, you walk into the liquor store, if you're a consenting adult, you could buy, and there's any type of booze imaginable, and not just in liquor stores. In various states, there's you can walk into gas stations and convenience stores and buy. And buy all kinds of different kinds of booze. So there's no free market anywhere in the United States on virtually anything. But liquor stores, I think, liquor alcohol trafficking, I think, is close, relatively close. What mechanism can we get from here to there regarding drugs? That's an interesting practical question. I think the template we have is prohibition of alcohol. I mean, in the U.S., that's the closest template we have to a similar kind of governmental banning of drugs and then an eventual lifting, on the ban. And I think we're starting to see the same kind of social activities that led to the end of alcohol ban in the United States. I think we're starting to see that in the U.S. and in Canada, and that is the law against alcohol consumption was enormously unpopular. And there were so many people breaking it. The breaking of that law was so widespread, and I think there was so many people who opposed it that eventually, of course, FDR lobbied Congress to repeal that law, and he succeeded in 1933. It's an interesting point, and there might be a lesson here for us, and that is FDR was popular after he pushed for repeal of Prohibition, and it helped him through the years of the Depression that he exacerbated. I mean, this myth that FDR got the U.S. out of the Depression is a canard. That's just false. The Depression went on for year after year after year after year. In 1938, 5 years after FDR was inaugurated, the United States was in the throes of the Depression as bad as when he was elected in 1932. But FDR remained popular in part because he had repealed alcohol prohibition. And I think we need to. I think what we're starting to see now slowly in the U.S. and in Canada is much more public speaking out against these laws. And I think we're starting to see some forward motion. There were certain states in the U.S. like Colorado and I think the state of Washington, right, which has legalized marijuana. That's absolutely absurd that marijuana should be banned. I mean, it's just a farce. I mean, it's as innocuous. It's a much less harmful drug than alcohol is, which is legal almost everywhere. And yet people, Mark Emery, was it Mark Emery's last name? I forget his name. I wrote it down. Yeah, Mark Emery does 5 years in prison for selling, marijuana seeds. I mean, that's a disgrace. And I think people are starting to realize that's, here's the thing. I think young people well, it's not just young. Drug use has been widespread, for like 50 years now. I think a lot of people who are 50 or 60 years old recognize how innocuous marijuana use is. The kids certainly do. The kids very often, the 18, 20, 25-year-old, they're often not politically, interested. They're not motivated to get involved in the political process or even to vote in many cases. I try to convince my students to vote, and they're not that motivated. But I think there is a growing awareness in North America, in the U.S. and Canada both, that these laws are draconian. And I think in time, and I don't think it's going to be that much time regarding marijuana, there are going to be politicians who are aware that, what do politicians want? What's the most important thing to a politician? Get elected. And the second most important thing? Get reelected. That's right. The politicians say that about themselves. This is like a joke. And so I think I think it's just a matter of time, and not that much time regarding marijuana, that an increasing number of politicians are going to realize this is popular. This could help get them elected, and I think they're going to take up the charge here. And the more we could convince people rationally that the legal war on drugs is an abysmal failure in every possible way, I think the more it will add to. So I think legalization of marijuana is coming, soon, and then if we could start there, I think that's a first step towards the legalization of drugs.
Well, thank you for a principled and nuanced argument. I liked every bit of it, and actually it was the best part of my day today, so thank you. But often I find that when people make principled and nuanced arguments to someone who knows full well that they're making a good argument, the attempt will be made to dumb down your message and to say, what about the children? Whether it's guns or prostitution or drugs or what have you, it's always, what about the children? So what would you say to somebody who said, here you are advocating the free market will take care of everything, that's your whole argument, you want the government out of everything, it's complete anarchy and chaos. What about the 12-year-old who some adult is trying to sell some crack to in a back alley? Your approach would have that child the victim of the drug dealer and blah, blah, blah. So what do you say to people who make that kind of argument about your argument?
Okay, that's a good question. What about the statist, argument that, on the principle of individual rights and the free society and free markets that I advocate, what about the children? How do we protect a 12-year-old kid in the schoolyard or wherever from some drug dealer who's selling him or her crack? And I think first of all, it's a good point, because when you bring children into it, that's why I kept stressing consenting adults, right? When you bring children into it, the equation certainly changes, because a 12-year-old is not mature enough to make an informed choice on this, and parents need to protect their children from this, and the legal system needs to protect children from this. So I think first of all, I think parents need to. There's several things. First of all, I think parents. This is largely a moral issue, and it's first foremost and always a parent's responsibility to teach the child moral responsibility. I think it's our responsibility as parents to teach the child, from the earliest days about what's possible in life, what could kill him or her, the danger of lethal drugs. And I think first of all that's the parent's job. If the parent fails, and the young child is imbibing, buying, wants to use toxic drugs, I think it should be against the law for somebody to sell drugs to a minor. Certainly the kind of toxic drugs that you're talking about. The child is not ready to make that decision. At some point, granted, some point somebody becomes a legal adult. Age 18 is as good as any, I think, and I think the legal drinking age should be 18. What's the drinking age in Canada? In the United States, it's 21. And I think, it's ridiculous. If somebody's an adult, a legal adult at age 18, I remember when was it, in the 70s, I think it was. I'm not a drinker, so I don't have any dog in this race. I didn't really follow but I think it was in the 70s in the U.S., they lowered the drinking age from 21 to 18. And then in the 80s, they raised it again to 21, I think. And the argument for lowering it to 18 always made sense to me because, one, you're a consenting adult. Two, you could leave you could leave your parents' house at age 18 without their consent. You could join the military if you want without their consent. You could risk your life to defend freedom in your country at that age, but you can't go into a bar and have a beer. It was ridiculous. And I think the rationale, of course, is to try to prevent drunk driving. The thinking is that at that age, 18, 19, 20, whatever, they're too young. You're going to get more drunk drivers. That may be. I'm not sure. I don't know about that one way or the other. But the point, of course, is you punish the guilty, not the innocent. So I think the laws against drunk driving should be very, very strict. Very strict, because you're risking the lives of innocent people. When you do that, I don't think the law should prohibit 18-year-olds from drinking alcohol. They're legal adults. Granted, whatever age we define legal adults as, is somewhat arbitrary, because people mature emotionally and intellectually at different rates. I think 18 is as good an age as any. And I think, for consenting adults, 18 or older, it's their right to choose, what substances they can imbibe, as I discussed. I don't think parents have the right to choose to have their 12-year-old kid use crack, because you could objectively, that is biologically, medically, demonstrate in court the danger to a child of using that drug, and it's putting a child's life at risk. I don't think a parent has that moral authority to do that. So I think the government here has to protect the rights of the children and prevent. I certainly wouldn't arrest a 12-year-old, but I think it should be against the law for the drug dealer, to sell drugs to a minor. The government has to protect the rights of children. It has to protect what's physically dangerous to them. And I think Ayn Rand was very good at that. The government has to prevent physical harm to a child.
Dr. Bernstein, there are a couple points that I've always found really interesting, and I'm just wondering why you didn't mention them. One is that people who produce and traffic illegal drugs are making a choice to get paid to risk going to jail. And second, that the fact that they can't just call the police to protect themselves means that they're going to have a lot of demand for illegal weapons. I'm just wondering if you think those things are interesting and why you may not have mentioned them. And did I get your name right, Dr. Bernstein?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Sure. People trafficking in illegal drugs, he said, are willing to risk their life and consequently have a demand for guns, which in many cases are also illegal. Why didn't I mention that? Well, I mean, I think what you say is true, but it's not. I didn't see it as being central to the, I didn't see it as being essential to the case that I was making. I think that, to me, I think one of the real benign consequences, practical consequences of decriminalizing drugs is that you get the trafficking out of the hands of these gangsters. And that's why what I kept stressing is, the homicide rate comes down when you decriminalize these substances. The vile gangsters aren't trafficking in drugs anymore. They're not killing each other over lucrative territory.
So I wonder if we're not making some assumptions here. And so we've talked a lot about the pros of ending drug prohibition. I think those are pretty clear, and I can say that I agree. But I'm wondering about the cons. We haven't really talked much about what some of those potential cons might be. And I hear us jumping and assuming what would happen in these communities if we take out prohibition. So I'm wondering, So you talk about people having choices and using rational persuasion to sway the choices that people make. And I'm wondering if we're not perhaps giving a little bit too much weight to individual choice and not taking enough of a look at socioeconomic conditions that are also playing into this equation as well. So, for example, we talk about drug users and sellers and how they play into the equation, but we're not talking much about the fact that there are also people that are living on the fringes of society. And the drug user and the seller are looking for ways out, you could say, in different ways. You know, the drug user may be an escape from the difficulty of their social conditions, and the drug seller earning a sustainable income and maybe looking for a way out of those same conditions by making an income. And so I'm wondering, you know, what's the impact on those people who are using substances to cope then if we take the drugs out of the hands of the vile businessmen, as you put it, and into the hands of the honest businessmen? Is that going to affect their access? What's going to be some of the overall ripple effects and impacts on those communities is what I'm wondering.
All right, the question regards the socioeconomic conditions of people who, what did you say, living on the fringes of society, I think was the term you used, or who are poor or whatever. There are certainly drug dealers in poor communities who this is a way to make money, right? This is a way. In fact, sometimes it's a way to get wealthy, and often it's a way to get killed, you know, at a very early age, you know, and drug users who may have be living in poor conditions, and the drugs kind of anesthetize them to the pain of their life. What's the consequences here? It's an interesting question because, you know, I think for one thing, the legalization of drugs and then or the decriminalization of drugs and then the government taking a laissez-faire attitude on it means that there's no smuggling of drugs necessary, which means the price of drugs is going to come down. Now, given that market responds to price more than to any other factor, that's a factor towards increased drug use. The drugs are going to be cheaper when you eliminate the need for smuggling. So just on if we left it just at that, then I think you're going to see increase use of drugs, and probably also by people who are living in poor conditions and who use the drugs to anesthetize themselves to the pain. This is all the more reason, I think, why we need to wage a real rational campaign to reach out to everybody. The way out of poverty is by education and full-time employment. That doesn't change. It doesn't change regarding racial issues or ethnic issues or tribal issues or whatever. The way out of poverty is by not even necessarily by education, although I certainly advocate education. But the way out of poverty is full-time employment. I don't think of viable ways to be a gangster, drug dealer, you know, and then die at age 21, you know, in a shootout with another drug dealer. But it's through full-time employment, and I think this is the message that we need to tell everybody in society. And by the way, one of my heroes, I hope you know who he is, Ben Carson. You guys know who Ben Carson is? That's really sad. People don't. Ben Carson is a brain surgeon, you know. Yeah, in the U.S., he's from Detroit. He comes out of this broken home, you know, and he's this poor family. Now he's a brilliant guy. Most of us aren't as brilliant as he is, but nevertheless, and he's running for the Republican, you know, nomination for president. This is the guy I want to see as the United States next president. For many reasons. One is that he's not a politician. I think we've elected enough career politicians, and I think it's time to elect a brain surgeon. You know, and a real innovator in, as I understand, he's written any number of books. You know, he's a real innovator in brain surgery for children. He's a real hero. He came out of this, you know, these real tough conditions, and you know. and by use of this. Now, again, most of us aren't as brilliant as he is, but we have, all of us as human beings have a high degree of intelligence, and I think the use of our minds, education, and full-time employment. This is the message we need to tell everybody, poor or otherwise. Not drug use and not being a gangster, criminal, drug dealer. Violent, and violently shooting it out with other drug dealers, over turf wars. So I think the message here needs to be, the same to everybody. But for the poor in particular, we've seen the whole history of capitalism is a history. Remember something. 200 years ago, 250 years ago in Great Britain, on the eve of the Industrial Revolution, the life expectancy was like 33, and per capita income was like, measured in $200 to $300 per year. You're talking abysmal poverty. Today, in the capitalist and semi-capitalist nations, including Canada, which by the way has a great deal of capitalism here in this country, which people don't realize, the life expectancies are 75 to 80. The living standards are measured in tens of thousands of dollars. The poverty line, prior to the capitalist inception of capitalism, the poverty line was, less than $1 a day. The poverty line today is measured in terms of several $1,000s. Capitalism has raised the bar enormously. So I think, what the whole history of capitalism is the system that has raised living standards dramatically and raised millions and millions and millions and millions and hundreds of millions, probably billions of people out of poverty and into the middle class. And what the whole history of capitalism shows us is that the application of rational intelligence and a strong work ethic in a free society or relatively free society, in a relatively free market, this is the way to climb out of poverty, including for blacks in the United States who've been hideously persecuted for centuries. But today, in a relatively free society, we've seen the rise of a very educated black middle class in the United States. And Ben Carson, I think, personifies that brilliantly. I think he's not the only one, but he's running for president, so he comes to mind, and he's a real hero of what he's done with his life. Yeah, where's the man with the mic? Oh, there he is.
Do you know anything about experience in Portugal? And if you do, can you tell us more about it? And what do you think about Canada? How far we are from this kind of experience? Because they don't have any drug-related crime almost for 10 years.
I didn't hear the question. Did you hear it? Did you hear it, Conrad? What was the question?
Yeah, he gave the example of Portugal. They've had very little or no drug-related crime. Have you done any for the last 10 years? So do you know anything?
And they have access to all drugs, literally, all drugs for the last 20 years.
So
there is no any criminal punishment for any drugs. Crack, whatever you want.
Yeah. So drugs are decriminalized in Portugal, and they don't have a crime rate.
Years ago, and for the last 10 years, they have a lowest rate related drug crime in European Union.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I'm sorry then. So okay then.
I didn't know that.
Let's learn together and deliver this message to Ottawa. Which one? Yeah, well, and the major point is when it's decriminalized, why somebody can be afraid that the drug dealer will sell drugs to kids? It's impossible. It's against normal logic. If it's legal business and you can sell drug legally, why are you going to go to school and sell it to kids? I mean, this is obviously crime.
But
thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the information. He's saying that drugs have been decriminalized in Portugal for the last 10 years, I think he said, and the crime rate is way down. Well, I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised, and I appreciate the information. Yeah, so that's good to know, and I think that's very predictable, on the principles that we've been discussing here tonight.
The situation here in Canada is that we have somewhat of a paradox. We've got so-called free market government, the Conservatives, and they're prohibitionists. And the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, he conflates marijuana with more serious drugs, and it really irks me when he does that. On the other side of the House, we have Liberals, Democratic Socialists, and the Green Party, not counting the Quebec separatists. There are, on the left, basically, I don't know about the Greens, but they could very easily, with the way that things are going poll-wise right now, in October, when we have our next election, form a coalition government. And all three of those parties are pro-decriminalization, but they're pretty much tax and spenders as well. So there's the paradox. They legalize marijuana, which is what they're talking about. They're not talking about drugs in general. That's going to be heavily taxed. It will be a cash cow for the government.
Which raises the price significantly.
Yeah, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, he's saying he's saying in Canada, you basically have there's the mixed economy. It's not appreciably different from in the United States or in Europe, and so that when marijuana is decriminalized, the government will tax the hell out of it, and it'll be a cash cow for the government. Yeah, I know that's the way semi-socialist politicians think. It wouldn't occur to them or they would recoil in horror from decriminalize and then take a laissez-faire attitude. When they decriminalize with marijuana, they'll tax the hell out of it like they do with cigarettes, and of course the price that goes up. I was saying before in response to an earlier question that decriminalization, and selling drugs in non-pharmaceutical drugstores will bring the price way down because you eliminate the smuggling. Smuggling is expensive. The cost of smuggling is expensive. But the taxation is going to bring it, way up again. So there's various factors. So I obviously oppose that. I don't think the government should tax it. What I advocate is decriminalization and laissez-faire. But I think you're right. I think in present day political realities, that's what's going to happen, and we need to fight a principled campaign here for individual rights that the government shouldn't be taxing this. And also I think very often they place heavier taxes on cigarettes, alcohol, drugs. They call it a sin tax, right? You see the influence of religion. You got let's call it a devil tax. We're going to tax people for following the devil. But I think you're right. We need to campaign here for individual rights across the board. Not just for drug decriminalization, but also for putting an end to these kind of taxes. Any victory we take, any victory we win is forward motion, and I think marijuana will be decriminalized. It is slowly being decriminalized in various places, including even in the United States, the land of the free, where there's been draconian anti-drug laws for a long time. But the decriminalization and legalization of marijuana, for instance, in Colorado and Washington, is a very good sign.
Hello, sir. My name is Julia. My question is, legalizing everything, not just marijuana, right? I have a young brother who's 19 years old, and he's unpolluted completely. I'm ashamed to even smoke a cigarette in front of him. He goes to Schulich University, and now he's 19 years old, and he's going to go to clubs, and he's going to be in that environment, right? Mm-hmm. When I was in that environment 10 years ago, that got to me, and I wouldn't want that to get to him. So I still think that some things should be under control, because Amsterdam is known for, you hear Amsterdam. It's a country of where you can smoke weed freely, right? And let's go to Amsterdam for that. Russia is like, the alcohol is legal, so we have a nation of alcoholics, pretty much. That's sad. USA, I think, is a nation of pill poppers because they think, there's a pill for that. If you're fat, there's a pill for that. If you're crazy, there's a pill for that too, and etc. I would not want Canada to be a country of, you can do any drugs here. I don't want that reputation, or for my brother to be growing up in this country. So, and it's kind of like, when you post online that you're having a party, you're going to have your friends come over, but some of the people you don't like are going to pop by too. So it's kind of like opening the door to any drugs. It's going to have very, really bad outcome as well.
Well, she's saying that, if Canada has decriminalizes drugs, then there's going to be bad consequences. And she points out in Russia, alcohol is legal, and there's a lot of alcoholism. And in the United States, you can get various prescription pills, and there's a lot of pill poppers. And in Amsterdam, there's marijuana is legal, and there's a lot of potheads and everything. So that if Canada decriminalizes drugs, there'll be a lot more drug use. The part of the answer to that is the drugs you're talking about are already available. There's no keeping them from people who want them. Part of the talk was, the abysmal failure of trying to prevent people from procuring X, whatever value you want to substitute for X, by criminalizing it. It's just not possible. And so the drugs are widely available anyhow. And not difficult for anybody to find. But I do think, like I was saying before, if we decriminalize drugs and take a laissez-faire attitude towards them, then the price will come down. Market responds to price. So I think just taking that issue alone, I think there'll be increased demand for drugs, and that would tend to support what you're saying. But I'm not saying that we should simply decriminalize drugs and then take a laissez-faire attitude to them. In addition to that, I think we should wage the campaign against drugs, a relentless campaign against drugs that I've been advocating, a moral, philosophic, educational campaign against drugs, and I think we will save a lot more innocent lives than the failed legal campaign against drugs, which is an abysmal failure. I mean, how many people on drugs would we need, before we acknowledge that the legal campaign against drugs is a failure? It's simply a failure. You can't keep drugs out of people's hands that way, or anything else for that matter. Guns, alcohol, prostitution. How much evidence do we need to realize what a failure prohibition, legal prohibition is on any issue?
We're coming.
Let's say in the United States, let's ban the reading of the Bible. How's that? This is so. Let's ban the Bible. All this stuff is crazy. Let's ban the publication and the reading of the Bible. Now, how successful do you think that's going to be, given that there's millions and millions and millions of devout Christians in the United States? Banning the Bible, is simply going to be a failure. It's interesting to be gangsters bootlegging the Bible, and this is going to be. Well, there was that. The gangsters will bootleg the Bible, but there's that famous economist. I think he's down at Clemson University in South Carolina who wrote a famous essay on this that was expanded into a book on Baptists and bootleggers. And how the unlikely alliance of Baptists and bootleggers to support prohibition for very different reasons. Alcohol prohibition, but the Baptists supported it because they wanted to wage a war on the devil. The bootleggers supported it because they could make an enormous amount of money, from prohibition. So the Baptists and bootleggers are not, they've already been in bed together, and so they'll be in bed together again once we ban the Bible. The bootleggers will smuggle in the Bible. There'll probably be gang warfare, interestingly, on the lucrative territories for selling the Bible. That'd be interesting, and the gangsters will kill each other to carve out territory to sell the Bible. Innocent people get caught in the crossfire. But the point, of course, is in the United States, where there's a lot of Christians, the Bible's in demand, right? There's people who want it, there's people who can afford to pay it, and no government ban on the Bible is going to be successful any more than the ban on drugs or alcohol or anything else. It's a failure. It's an abysmal failure. And all we're going to do is more people are going to get killed. People are going to continue to kill themselves on drugs because they can get them, and more people will be killed in the drug trafficking because, for the reasons I gave. It's now in the hand of gangsters.
So we have 10 minutes left, and there's a few questions. So if we can
I have a few books to sell, too.
If we can have very quick questions and quick answers as well, please.
Some of these have already been, you claimed one already, right? Okay, so I got 2 left. Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Bernstein, thank you very much for this talk. I really enjoyed it, and you brought out a lot of good points, a lot of good rational points. Now, I want to ask you a question. You mentioned Mark Emery, and I'm glad you did, because he's a hero in his own right, because he defied the prohibition in his own way through civil disobedience. Now, how far would you recommend pushing the envelope as far as ending prohibition? Even though he was sent to jail for several years, the impact that he created was the talk and the actual prohibition ending in several states, and now it's big talk here in Canada. So I don't know if you know his personal history, but he did very well.
Mark Emery?
Mark Emery, yes.
Okay. So what, I'm sorry, Ted. What was the question about Mark Emery?
How far would you push the civil rights or civil disobedience envelope as far as ending prohibition?
Well, that's an interesting point. How far should somebody go to, regarding civil disobedience to end prohibition? Well, civil disobedience against unjust laws, I think, is morally appropriate. Certainly in the United States, there's a whole history here. The country was founded by lawbreakers, right? By revolutionaries who were British subjects who rose up against the king, against the moral and legal authority of the king. So and the Boston Tea Party is a good example. I certainly think that kind of civil disobedience is morally appropriate. I think in various countries, including the United States, the abolitionist movement were lawbreakers. The Underground Railroad that helped slaves escape, people risk their lives, including the runaway slave, to help people escape to freedom. So Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. If you saw the movie Selma that was out in January, people risked their lives. Yes, this is true, and risked their lives against brutality in various Jim Crow states in the U.S. to gain the rights guaranteed them as U.S. citizens. In this case, it was voting rights. So I think there's a noble history of this. I think Mark Emery is a good example. He's a heroic example. So I think it's morally right. And then the question is, how committed to this value some individual is, how courageous he or she is. Are they willing to risk their life? Are they willing to risk incarceration and prison time? It's certainly a noble endeavor. It's a morally legitimate choice. I don't think it's anybody's obligation to stand up knowing I'm going to go to prison, on this. But it's certainly a heroic. It's certainly a heroic choice.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your answer very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for coming. It was a fun night. You have the last word here, Conrad, or?
I don't. I know we have a question, but we only have 5 minutes. So, quick question, quick answer, and unfortunately, it'll have to be the last.
Yeah,
Sorry
and then we sell books. We need a few minutes to sell books. This is a capitalist endeavor here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernstein, for your talk. Just a quick comment and a quick question. First off, with respect to Portugal and their whole experiment with the decriminalization, it's only on the buy side. There is no jurisdiction anywhere in the world which does it on the sell side, meaning where it's produced, it's still heavily regulated and illegal. And that's because of the International Narcotics Control Board, which is the UN entity which is responsible for the worldwide ban on the supply of drugs. Glenn Greenwald has written quite a bit on that subject well before Edward Snowden ever came up in the zeitgeist. My question to you would be, you made reference many times to toxic drugs. So what I wanted to ask you is, do you make a distinction between, overall drug toxicity and what we understand to be toxic drugs through a very highly distorted lens of prohibition? Because, there's all sorts of stuff that drugs are cut with, such as going back to alcohol prohibition. Over 2,000 people a year were dying in the New York City area alone due to consumption of denatured alcohol and methanol and cut substances like formaldehyde, and today that goes on with levamisole and cocaine, and people don't know that if the oxycodone, and earlier on, this is in the past 5 years, there were various instances of people dying because they thought they were consuming oxycodone, and it was really fentanyl, which is 400 times more powerful than heroin.
So are you a chemist, a
No,
physician, a biologist, a drug dealer? How do you know how you have all this knowledge?
I've definitely researched this quite a bit in terms of substances, and I've ever since I found out about the real economic numbers regarding the drug war and the real toxicities regarding a lot of these drugs, I became a very avid proponent of complete legalization. So I just wanted to really ask you, with respect to toxicity, I mean, we hear about all these people dying of drugs, of various overdoses, but doctors never really look at if there's some sort of other factor which is responsible for the person overdosing. In fact, it's not the drug, it's something else. It's one of the cut substances instead.
That's an interesting point. And you hear the question, he's talking with the knowledge of a Ph.D. in chemistry, and on the question, if I understood you correctly, was how toxic are some of these drugs themselves, and how toxic are they because of what they're diluted with or cut with or additives or whatever. No, I don't know the answer to that. Those are scientific questions. There's no distinctive. I'm a philosopher. There's no distinctively philosophical means to know that. But I do know that what you're saying is true. Certainly, during alcohol prohibition, people were making alcohol out of wood alcohol, which of course is extremely dangerous. People go blind. People die from it. And so I think that's all the more reason why we need a rational, moral, philosophic campaign here to warn people about. I don't know how dangerous. I'm just guessing here that cocaine in any form, no matter how pure it is dangerous. Heroin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in any form, no matter how pure it is dangerous. Maybe more so because of additives. I don't know. I think the more dangerous it is, regardless if it's dangerous in its pure form, or regardless if it's more dangerous because of additives, it's all the more reason why we need, a moral campaign to educate people on the dangers of this. That this is life harm. This is where Ayn Rand's philosophy really has an enormous amount of value added. That values are that which promote life, not that which destroys life. And there's so much available to us in a free or even semi-free society. Why risk it, for no matter how intense the high is, on cocaine, which I wouldn't know, or heroin. Hell, I get a great high from sex, and I know that's healthy. I know, making love is healthy. That's I don't know. I'm not interested in cocaine. I'm just interested in in the right relationship. And that's a great high. And so I think all the more reason why we need the moral campaign, to warn people about the dangers of this.
That's it, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.